Excellent. Good morning. It's a rare occasion I get to say good morning from the Eastern time zone, and I feel that everybody is along with me. So unless you are out there in Iceland or Germany, good morning to everybody. I want to welcome everybody to today's edition of the Client Enrichment Series. My name is Eric Fulton. I will be the host of the series today, and we are going to talk about what to expect from RWA fee reform. Before we jump into the content, I want to switch to the next slide, and I do want to take note of a couple of resources that the GSA has available to our customers. As you can see, and as we all know, these are unprecedented and different times for us all. I myself am coming to you from my home office, not the GSA headquarters as I usually do, and I trust that many of you are in similar situations. GSA has made available and put online multiple resources to help our customers and customer agencies handle COVID-19, both in regard to cleaning and disinfection, frequently asked questions, purchase of supplies, and as we enter different phases of this situation, returning to GSA facilities. You can find links to these. We have them up on the screen here, but you can find them if you go right to the homepage of the GSA, www.gsa.gov. You will find links right there on the homepage to our COVID-19 resources page and the Return to Facilities website. Feel free to make use of them and share them with others in your agency. All right, so moving on to today's program. As I said, my name is Eric Fulton, and I am the National Program Manager for Customer Outreach and Communication at GSA headquarters in Washington, D.C., and more importantly, I am your host for today's edition of the Client Enrichment Series. Couple of quick housekeeping items to get out of the way up front. One, please be aware that we are recording today's session. We do that because we archive past Client Enrichment Series videos on our YouTube channel. You can access more than 30 of our past sessions anytime, day or night. There's a link to our YouTube channel at the end of today's slide deck. We're expecting a decent-sized crowd today. For the optimal audio experience, we highly recommend that you choose the listen-only option when broadcast the audio through your computer speakers or connected headphones. Helps us save capacity, preserve some of the bandwidth for the presentation. Understand not everybody has that ability. If you do, you can disconnect and reconnect through the audio button and click listen only. But if you're joining us by the telephone bridge line, that is fine as well. We've automatically muted everybody's phone and audio, and that is to help us control the sound quality of today's presentation. You will have the opportunity to ask questions and interact with our subject matter experts in the chat box. I'll go over that just a little bit later. And just so everyone is aware, this is the second of 3 identical sessions on the same topic. So if you would like to come back and ask some additional questions, learn a little more, or you have a colleague who you think would benefit from this presentation, you can come back on Thursday, July 16th, and you can register for that session at www.gsa.gov/CES. And as I mentioned, if you're unavailable that day, we will post recordings of this session online on our YouTube channel. All right, moving on. Today's presentation will be led by Steve Sacco. He is the National Program Manager for our Reimbursable Services Division, and he's a part of GSA's RWA fee reform team for the past several years. Steve oversees the Data Management and Process Improvement team, which manages the eRETA application. Hopefully, if you handle RWAs or have been in one of our past sessions, you're familiar with that application, at least just in passing, if not more. Additionally, his team provides data and metrics to senior leadership about the health and trending of the Reimbursable Services program. So prior to working with Reimbursable Services, Steve spent 7 years as GSA's Chief Financial Officer. He's a Senior Financial Analyst and also a Financial Management Intern. Steve earned a BS in Meteorology and a BS in Economics from the Pennsylvania State University, and later a Master's in Business Administration from the University of Maryland. So today's topic is what to expect from RWA fee reform. And it's actually kind of a misnomer, as several components of GSA's RWA fee reform effort have already been put in place. Steve will review each of these components, but spend a majority of the time today on the new RWA fee structure, which will go into effect on August 1st, 2020. It's just about 5 weeks from today. This is GSA's first change to the RWA fee structure in 25 years. Steve will introduce the new fee structure, he'll demonstrate how the fee is calculated, and he'll review what to expect as that August 1st, 2020 implementation date nears. So, before we turn over the presentation to Steve, some additional housekeeping items. One more time, do want to remind everybody that we are recording this session. We do that so that we can post this along with 30+ other Client Enrichment Series presentations on our YouTube channel, the link to which is on the last page of your slide deck. Speaking of that slide deck, all registered attendees should have received a copy of the slides via email. However, if you did not, or if you lost it, I'd like to introduce you to the Files pod that you see above your chat pane. And what that has is a copy of today's presentation as a PDF, along with some other documents that Steve will mention over the course of the presentation. So once again, if you are connected through your phone and you have the ability to listen through your computer speakers or connected headphones, that way we do encourage you to use the listen-only option. You can switch your audio preferences by hitting that telephone button up on the top of your screen. However, you are also welcome to use the conference bridge line if you have telephone use and are unable to listen through your speakers. So, as I mentioned earlier, we do want to encourage questions and interaction with our subject matter experts today. Please make use of the chat feature. That's where you said good morning and hello to me earlier today. At any time during today's presentation, we have a handful of subject matter experts who are monitoring the chat and will address your questions as they come in. In some instances, we may ask Steve a question to demonstrate on the screen. In large part, we're going to handle a lot of the questions in the chat today. Now, any questions we don't get to today will be pulled out of the chat along with all the questions we did and answers we gave, and we compile them into a more formal frequently asked questions document, which we make available after the session and post online, both to our Client Enrichment Series website and our RWA website. That's www.gsa.gov/CES and /RWA. We'll be mentioning those throughout today's presentation. One more note, if you want to get a better view of the screen and what Steve is going over, you can hit the four-headed arrow at the top right. What that does minimizes the chat feature, maximizes your viewing pane, gives you a good look at what Steve is showing. If you have a question, you hit that four-headed arrow again, chat feature pops back up, type your question into the chat. So, almost time to start the presentation today. However, we do want to get a little background information on our attendees today. This helps us better tailor this and future presentations. So we do have 2 poll questions that we are going to ask here. And so we'll bring the first one on in, and this is about e-RITA, which I mentioned earlier in the introduction. We want to know what access you currently have to e-RITA. Having access to e-RITA not mandatory or necessary for this presentation, but we are curious to know, as obviously e-RITA and reimbursable services go digital hand in hand. So are you a data entry, read-only, don't have any? What is e-RITA? All right, so it seems as though 60% of the folks responding are data entry users. That's fantastic, and another 13% are read-only users. So looking at maybe 2/3 to 3/4 of the audience here, as all the results come in, are either read-only or data entry users, but we do have about 20 to 30% who either don't have e-RITA access or don't know what it is. And you know what? That is okay for the purposes of today, but I think that if you are an e-RITA user, you'll have a deeper understanding of how all of these worlds are connected. So we're going to get that poll question out of the way. And we're going to bring in our second question. We're going to format that second question here. Maybe we're not going to format that question. So this one asks, there we go, thank you. We were curious to know how you had heard about the upcoming new RWA fee structure. It looks like people are typing into the chat here, and we do appreciate that. So obviously this information is helpful to us as we better fine-tune our communication processes. Steve will go over how we did communicate this and where you can find all of those archived communications and that information. So we do appreciate all of the feedback coming. Ah, there we go. Look at that. All right. So with checkboxes all along, and so we have people coming in. We did want to know, did you receive communication from eRita? Maybe if you're an eRita user, you get those emails from eRita. You got a quick tip probably this morning, so about half of you seem to have found it that way. Looks like about 19% heard from their GSA national or regional client executive. That is the office that I'm with, so I appreciate those who responded that way. And then we have another 35% who just heard about it through the CES web team here, got an email from us. That's great. And then obviously there are some others who got communications from colleagues or just saw it on the website, about 12% who who received it forwarded from a colleague. Excellent. All right, so we're going to get that poll question out of the way. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over the reins to today's presenter, Steve Sacco. So Steve, go ahead and take it away.
All right. Thank you, Eric. And thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning. And thank you for answering those poll questions we had at the top. It gives myself and my team a sense of who we have attending here today. I am impressed. Some of the response to the last poll who indicated they hadn't heard anything about the fee reform communications, but you managed to make it here. So I don't know how that happened, but I'm glad you're here. So welcome. And let's jump into this stuff today. Some of you might not be following along or might not be able to see my screen. I know we had that issue with the last fee reform session last week. With that said, if you have the slide deck that we sent out in advance of today's presentation, I will do my best to indicate which slide I am referring to. So right now I am on slide number 4 so that you can kind of follow along with me. So the topics we will cover today, as you can read for yourself if you haven't already, we'll talk about the fee reform resource page, so where we have some resources for you to go and look at more details or really repeat details of what we're about to discuss today for you to look at, or maybe one of your colleagues who could not make today's call, you can refer them to our website where there's more information or where all this information is archived out there for future reference. We'll talk a quick history about interagency fees. It's not just an RWA thing, so just in case you thought RWAs was the only program in the entire federal government that charged fees to other federal agencies, we want to let you know that that is a myth. We are one of many, and we are required by law, so we'll talk about that a little bit just to give you a quick understanding. Then we'll get into the components of fee reform. As Eric mentioned, there's more than just the fee structure change itself. We'll look at the old fee structure, which most of you are familiar with. We'll look at the new fee structure, and then we'll have an added bonus that we didn't have in last week's presentation. We'll show you some examples of how the fee is calculated. It became abundantly clear to us last week that some of you weren't really sure how the fee was calculated in the first place today. So we'll go through some examples to make sure it's much clearer to how it works both today and how the new fee structure will work, which will function very similarly. And then just to kind of highlight it right up front here on the introductory slide, some of the most important takeaways today is that the new fee change will apply to every single RWA starting August 1st and beyond, and that includes overtime utilities. The RWA acceptance date is the key driver of which of the two fee structures apply. So we'll talk about that. We'll redefine the acceptance date, or kind of repeat what the acceptance date is and how it's defined. And more specifically, that third sub-bullet there is how the RWA acceptance date is defined based on the services. If it's a severable service, we define it one way. If it's a non-severable service, we define that acceptance date a different way. So that's a very important distinction to understand. And then lastly, we'll go through some screenshots of the RITA summary cost estimate and the RWA, just so you have a visual of where to look for these dates and know, okay, hey, the new fee structure or the old fee structure will apply given the date in this particular location on my estimate. And lastly, we'll close it out with something totally unrelated to fee reform, but just a reminder of our FY 2020 year-end deadline. So moving on to slide number 5 here. So this is just a quick recap. Some of you, or many of you, had indicated, the majority in that second poll, that you had been made aware of fee reform through communications that we've sent out. And as many of you probably saw, you received a new communication, albeit about e-RETA, not about fee reform, but we sent a new communication out just a few hours ago, the monthly June 2020 quick tip regarding or on e-RETA, specifically on treasury symbols and multiple accounting lines. So if you got that email today, that's a good sign, because we send out emails about fee reform to the exact same group of individuals. So if you got that email, you're already on our listserv. If you did not, as a quick sidebar, shoot us an email at ereta@gsa.gov to say, hey, you guys talked about these notifications in the fee reform training today, but I don't get them. Can you add me to the list? So just shoot us an email and we'll make sure we add you to our list moving forward. So this is a recap of the communications we have sent to date, dating all the way back to November when we first announced the new fee structure. And then as you can see here, there's been a few additional notifications in January, February, and then one most recently a few weeks ago, this month of June, where we announced the registration for these fee reform sessions, which I would think most of you got if you're here registered today, attending and listening. And in that one, we also had a helpful, handy-dandy Excel fee comparison calculator. And that fee calculator, which I'm going to show you here in just a second, just to kind of give you a quick sense of it, is also available from this meeting. If you go up to the files pod, what you expect from fee reform is at the top of your screen, about the middle. There's 3 files in there, and you can see the fee calculator is one of those files which you can download directly from this meeting. But just to kind of go off script here, if you will, I'm going to show you that fee calculator here really quickly here. So let me stop sharing this particular screen, and I'll share a different screen here. All right, so this is the fee comparison calculator that is available on our website. We emailed it out in that June communication, as I mentioned, and it's also available for download from this presentation today in that files pod at the top center. And this is what it looks like. It's just a basic calculator. On the left-hand side here in red, this is the current fee structure, the 4% fee plus the sliding scale fee. And then over here on the right-hand side in green is the new fee structure. So for example, if I type in a number here, let's say under the old fee structure, I estimated my construction costs to be, let's say, $500,000. So let's type in $500,000. And I plug that number in, and it automatically calculates for me the 4% fee, which is $20,000, and the sliding scale fee, which is an additional $15,000. Total fees, $35,675. On the other side of the black line here on the green new fee structure, that $500,000 automatically populated for me just to give me a quick comparison. We can see the total fee structure of the new fee is $40,000. So there you get a quick comparison, the new fee and the old fee. The new fee, as you'd expect, is a little bit higher. But this is just a simple, basic tool to give you a quick comparison of what the RWA would cost today in the old fee structure, or the current fee structure, I should say, and what the RWA would be tomorrow in the new fee structure after August 1st. So anyway, that resource is out there for you all to play with on your own time. I just wanted to give a quick demonstration of it. So let me go back to the slides here. Okay. And before I move on from slide 5, just to draw your attention to this final bullet, this is the location where you will find all of these resources, that fee calculator, the past communications, any future communications we might send out, which we will be sending at least a few more between now and August 1st and even beyond August 1st. So if you want to bookmark this website, if you have not already, www.gsa.gov/RWA. And then more specifically, when you get to that website, if you click on the Policy and Guidance tab in the left-hand pane, that will take you to where the RWA fee reform section is, and where all these past communications, this fee calculator, all the past resources we've sent out are archived for your review again. Okay, so moving on to slide 6 and then slide 7, we're going to talk about a little bit historical background on fees in the federal government in general. It's not just an RWA thing. But specific to RWAs, first and foremost, just to give you the history within GSA, back in 1995, and I'm sure many of you might not have been working with GSA, I should say, or even at GSA, depending on who you work for at that time. But just to give you that background, in 1995, an OIG audit internally indicated that, or found that, GSA was not recovering our indirect costs related to the RWA program. In a nutshell, we weren't charging anything at the time in 1995. And the IG said you have to charge something, you have to recover your overhead charges related to contract award, administration, data processing, legal, accounting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And at this time, back in 1995, the IG estimated that that cost of running the program accounted for roughly $25 million per year. So this was back in 1995 now, 25 years ago. The IG went on to say in the second bullet, if you're following along, by the fact that we were not charging any fees at the time for the RWAs and we were not recovering our indirect costs, we were effectively subsidizing the appropriations of other agencies at the expense of GSA's own appropriations. So that was why the fee structure needed to be put in place to make sure we were not subsidizing other agency appropriations. So the result of that was that the OIG mandated we come up with a fee structure, and in 1995 we did deploy the sliding scale fee structure in response to this OIG audit. So now moving on to slide 8, expanding out, not thinking of just GSA, fee structures are a thing used throughout the federal government where other agencies charge a fee, or where agencies charge a fee to other agencies for a service or some rendering of a service or good. These are just an example of some other agencies that charge fees. Our sister organization on the federal acquisition side, FAS, the Assisted Acquisition Service, AAS, charges fees for their services. Department of Interior has a similar assisted acquisition service, also charges a fee for that service. NASA has this government-wide acquisition contract program, also charges a fee for other agencies that utilize that. So these are just some examples. This is not an exclusive list or an all-exhaustive list. And this diagram you see on the left-hand side of slide 8 comes from a GAO report in 2011 called Report to Congressional Committees, or it was a report to congressional committees that was named Improvements Needed in Setting Fee Rates for Selected Programs. And more or less it analyzed 5 programs in the federal government that charge fees. The RWA program was not one of the ones they analyzed, but essentially the same umbrella of organizations, and said that effectively we want to look at, you want to identify and track your costs of running the program. You need to forecast future costs and revenues. You need to manage the reserve contribution and balances. Now that upper right bubble doesn't apply to RWA, so we don't really consider that one when we were doing our analysis. And then we set the fee rate to recover those costs. But before we can implement that fee rate, that very bottom bubble says we need to obtain approval for those fee rate changes. And we did that very thing. We went to OMB and we worked with them for almost 12 months to get their final approval on the fee structure we are now going to implement later this summer. So why are we changing our fee? Well, one of the biggest reasons is that, again, based on that GAO report and how we have to analyze the program, or a takeaway from that GAO report on the last slide that I showed was that effectively GAO suggests that every program that charges a fee should be breaking even over a 5-year period. So if in some years you're profiting, so to speak, you're recovering too much money, but in then other years in that 5-year window you're losing money, you're not recovering enough. As long as over a 5-year window you're effectively breaking even, they deem that as an appropriate fee structure. Well, looking back over the years, GSA has not been breaking even on our RWA program. We've been losing money on the RWA program. So in accordance with the IG audit, in accordance with GAO's report, and then in accordance with OMB's approval that we've gotten, they all agree that we should be increasing the fee to make sure we get closer to breaking even. And these are some of the reasons, the in-depth analysis our fee reform team did to find out why we might have not been recovering our costs in modern times. So first and foremost, the initial fee structure, as I mentioned, was implemented in 1995. So if you look at that second bullet here, the RWA program has grown tremendously, 540% since that 1995 time period when we did about $332 million in work in a given year. Compare that to 2017, where we did over $1.8 billion worth of work. And that $1.8 billion number is still accurate for FY18 and FY19. It's just we based, the fee reform team based their analysis as of FY17 when they did all their analytics. Furthermore, a growing portion of our direct costs were those that did not recover the 4% fee. So as we mentioned, the 4% fee is only applied on some expenses, and we'll elaborate on that in a little bit. So even though we were doing more and more work that was not 4% fee related, we are effectively delivering that work but not charging a fee on it. So the gap between what we needed to recover and what we should have been recovering was widening. And then the last bullet and its sub-bullets kind of give you a general sense. The large majority of our costs, indirect costs that the fee is meant to recover, are salary of GSA folks delivering the RWA program, whether it's the individuals you see on a day-to-day basis like project managers. There's a lot of back office folks who are doing stuff for your RWA, such as acquisition, budget analysts, and other support staff. And the cost of salaries have gone up, as you would have guessed. In 1995, for example, a GSA 12 salary was about $41,000 a year. In 2017, that same GSA 12 individual was making $62,000, almost $63,000 a year. That's a 53% increase in salary expenses alone, which make up the majority of GSA's indirect costs. But again, our fee hadn't been changed at all to keep up with the pace of salary changes. So let's move on to step 10, or slide 10, excuse me. And what does GSA personnel and services do your fees pay for? So again, to recap, what are the fees meant to recover? Effectively, they are meant, based on the OIG audit back in 1995, they are meant to recover any and everything that's utilized in order to deliver RWAs. So that's a mix of things that you guys see on a day-to-day basis, like a project manager, like a cost estimator. But then it also includes all of these other support functions that are behind the scenes that you don't interact with directly, that are still critical to delivering your RWA project. And probably that biggest one is the third bullet, GSA's contracting and acquisition staff. They execute over 65,000 contracts every single year for RWAs. That's a lot of procurement and contracting that your agencies don't have to do. But the benefit of it is we do all that work for you, and your agency, since you're funded, also gets all the credit for those contracts. So even though it's a GSA acquisition officer or contracting officer cutting the contract for your RWA, your agency gets the credit if that contract goes to, say, a small business, a minority-owned business, a woman-owned business, a veteran-owned business. All those small business administration objectives that we try to meet each year, you get credit for that, not GSA, when it relates to an RWA. And then we have a whole host of other support staff, regional CFO staff, the billing and collections team that handle your billing, your collections, your chargebacks, your rebilling, all that stuff. The folks on today's call, customer engagement, and your regional RWA managers. IT applications like READA and eREADA, and your VCSS system to look at your bills. Legal counsel has a little bit of a hand in everything to make sure none of us are doing anything illegal and not getting into trouble. So there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of individuals that touch the RWA program, some of them 24/7, some of them just a little bit at a time, but overall the fee has to recover all of these individuals. Now some of you might be saying, I can already picture the chat window, I'm not reading it, but I can picture what some of you might be saying, that, well, we feel like we don't get enough support today, or we never can get a hold of our project manager. And that's partly to blame because the fee was not changed earlier. We don't have the ability to hire more project managers because we can only hire them with the fee recovery we're getting. Now making this change with increasing the fee, we will be recovering more costs, or the appropriate number of costs, and that means we could essentially be able to hire additional project managers to give you more support and have project managers not spread so thin. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? You feel like you're not getting enough now, but we're not recovering enough funds to be able to hire more PMs to make you have more of a one-on-one relationship and not spread our PMs so thinly. So by increasing the fee and recovering more and be able to hire more PMs, we can actually potentially be able to provide a more personalized service than we weren't able to before. So some FAQs here, slide number 11 I'm on right now before we get into the fun stuff. I'll try to kind of go through this a little faster here. Some of you have asked, well, how will this fee change impact RWAs that have already been accepted? And the simple answer is it will not. The fee structure, which we'll get into in a little bit, is going to be based on that RWA acceptance date. So if you have an RWA that we accepted today or yesterday, and that RWA is clearly going to extend past August 1st, that RWA, because it was accepted today, will always and only charge you the current fee structure. Even if you amend it 2 years from now, the fee structure that will apply will always be the 4% fee and the sliding scale fee. We will never transition any single RWA from charging one fee structure to eventually charging a different fee structure. The RWA will only charge one of the two fee structures for its entire life. It will not switch back and forth. The next FAQ, which we've kind of gone over, or we have gone over, I showed the example, is there a fee calculator I can use before the fee is implemented? Of course, it's that Excel calculator we just showed a little while ago. It's available, again, on our website. It was available in the June 2020 communication we sent out a few weeks ago. It's available in this very presentation today in that files pod in the top center for download. All right, so progressing on to slide 12 and then 13, let's talk about the components of fee reform very quickly here. So fee reform, as many people have maybe misunderstood, is not just the fee structure change. In fact, when we started doing this effort to review the RWA program, review the fee structure, senior leadership and OMB for that matter said, are there ways we can, drive down our costs, i.e. find efficiencies so the costs are lower, therefore the fee increase can be lower, and or are there other ways to recover costs besides the fees? So we've implemented these three additional components of fee reform that you see on the screen besides just the fee structure change itself. So two of those items that will lead to reduced costs and therefore lower fees are the mandatory use of e-RITA, which you have all been doing since October 1st of this fiscal year. That is reducing our data entry burden because now you're entering information directly into the system as opposed to putting it onto paper, which means GSA then has to re-enter everything from paper into the system. Now we're reducing that or eliminating that redundant data entry. And the express menu of services. Some of you may have heard of this. It's still being rolled out, but effectively what the express menu of services is it's a we've identified a lot of items that we typically procure on RWAs for a lot of different customers, and we said, why don't we go ahead and put contracting vehicles into place in each region that says if you need one of these items that we purchase oftentimes, we can just go and procure that immediately off this express menu. Think of a restaurant. I just go and pick something off this menu, and it's already listed. There's a price or a price range listed for that item, and we procure that much quicker and much cheaper than having to go out and contract or procure the item each time, one at a time. Now we can just pick it off the menu and the price is already known. So that'll save us some money and save us some time, too, of procuring that so we can deliver your RWA faster. The final bullet there on fee reform components is more consistent direct charging. Now, this has always existed. It just hasn't really been implemented consistently across the country. And effectively, this is a way when we have some RWA projects that are very unique and custom and specific, and the customer might need a little bit more hand-holding than others, we direct charge for some GSA personnel's time to do that stuff. So one of the easiest examples to explain is, let's say you have some design work. You're building out some new space. We could contract out to an AE firm, an architect and engineering firm, or we have some architects in GSA, and we can do the design in-house. The GSA architect could do the design themselves, and instead of paying the firm and all their additional fees and overhead, we are just charging you for the architect's time directly. And this is a way that we can apply those additional fees, additional cost, the unique cost of this specific project directly to that RWA, as opposed to rolling that cost up into the bigger picture of the whole program and applying that fee to everybody. So this way we charge only the specific customer as opposed to making every single RWA customer pay a little bit of that. And so all these together have helped us make this new fee change increase not as dramatic as it otherwise could have been. If we didn't do any of these other things, these other components, the fee increase would have been even higher than it already is. So these things have helped us to keep that fee reform, or excuse me, keep the fee change down more than it otherwise would have been if it was done by itself. So slide 14, what are the components of fee reform? I talked through this, so I'm not going to go over it all again. I'll leave this slide 14 up here for just a few seconds so you can kind of reread it if you want to, but more or less everything I just mentioned was on this slide. So I should have waited to talk about this slide until I got here. The one thing I will mention, if you will draw your attention to the very bottom of this slide 14, the new fee structure. The new fee structure, which we're about to talk about and how it's broken down, we simplified it, so there's no more 4% fee and sliding scale. There's just one single fee structure. When we back tested this new fee structure to actual activity in FY15 through FY17, and then again in FY18 as well, we found it was equitable to all customers. So the new fee structure didn't unfairly say, customer ABC is going to be paying 25% of the new fee structure, and then the other 350 customers will split the other 75%. We didn't see any one customer that was going to be paying a lion's share or an unreasonably higher proportion of the fee structure than anybody else. In fact, as you can see in parentheses, when taken on an RWA by RWA basis, the new fee structure increases fees on average by only 1.3% per RWA. So on an average, it's a very nominal increase. All right, so let's move on to slide 15 and then slide 16 to give you a comparison of the old fee, or I guess the current fee, since it's not really old, it's still in place, and the new fee structure that goes into effect on August 1st. And then we'll go through some examples about how the fee is calculated on your bills, because this was a question that we got a lot last week. So we'll go through some examples there to give you a refresher on how the fee is calculated today. So here's the old fee structure. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this. I think many of you are familiar with it. There's a 4% fee. There was a sliding scale fee. The sliding scale was capped at $30,000 per RWA, but there was no cap on the 4% fee. Just for your own information, doesn't really help you in any way, shape, or form, but the fourth bullet there is just indicating that the 4% fee went to the cost recovery for the region, so those project managers in the region, cost estimators in the region, the acquisition folks in the region, budget analysts in the region, et cetera, et cetera. The sliding scale overhead was meant to cover central office costs, so the client engagement group, legal counsel, the cost of RETA and e-RETA, and the portion of the billing system, so all the systems costs are at the central office level. So that's how the breakdown happened. Those two fees went to different areas of the organization to offset costs. And then jumping down to the final bullet in yellow, it's not highlighted yellow for any reason, it's just meant to distinguish that this is for recurring RWAs. For recurring RWAs, R types, we charge a flat $100 per R type, as you know today, or for those of you that have bundled estimates, we charge $100 per estimate for bundled R type RWAs. Moving on to slide 17 here. So this is the new fee structure. So this is a single fee structure now that applies on top of every single RWA costs, with the exception of some very limited personal property costs. Now, what does that mean? So OMB, as part of our agreement with them when we were proposing this new fee structure to them, they said the fee structure should not be applied on top of some personal property costs like furniture, like equipment, like software. There's a few other things, but those are by far the most frequently purchased things on RWAs that we found. But they make up a very small percentage. So on an annual basis, we showed a few slides ago, we did about $1.8 billion worth of work in FY17. Out of that $1.8 billion, only 2.3% of those were made up of these personal property items like furniture, equipment, and software. That second sub-bullet, direct labor should be estimated though, so our pricing policy desk guide does indicate that even though there might not be a fee charged on top of procuring furniture, equipment, or software, the time and effort of a GSA individual managing, purchasing, or installing, or whatever the case might be for furniture or software should still be factored into those cost estimates. So how's the new fee structure organized? And the next few slides will show that a little bit better than these bullets. And let's just go to that right now. All right. So moving on to slide 18, you have a before and after, or not a before and after, but a comparison. So on the left-hand side is the sliding scale overhead rate and the tiers and the dollar ranges that apply. Now this is just the sliding scale. The 4% fee is not integrated into this calculator, so just realize that in most of your RWAs, there's a 4% fee applied and the sliding scale fee applied as well. Moving your attention to the right-hand side, now there's not the 4% fee and a sliding scale fee. There's just one single fee all merged together into one fee structure. And you see we have 18 tiers now, and more specifically at the very lowest of dollar ranges, so any RWA between $0 and $2,000, we will just charge a flat $500 fee. And then moving on, you can see some of the smaller dollar amounts have larger fees on them than they used to, and then going all the way down to the multi-million-dollar projects, which have lower fees and even lower than they do today. Now the finding here was that we were losing essentially a lot of money on these very small dollar RWAs. Because for every RWA, there was a fixed level of effort that we had to do. We had a cost estimator doing work. We had a project manager managing the project. There was a certain number of contracts or acquisition office still had to cut for those. With a certain number of bills we still had to manage and collect and rebill if appropriate. So there's always a fixed number of costs that happen, whether an RWA was $3,000 or $300,000. There's still some level of effort. And so the fee structure was increased more aggressively on these lower dollar amount RWAs to get closer to recovering our costs on those RWAs. Now, near the end of today's presentation, we will show you some ways that you can effectively bundle or otherwise not have to send us small RWAs. You can kind of bundle some of those into a single RWA. We'll show you that if it applies near the end of today's presentation. So be on the lookout for that. We'll get to that in just a moment. Moving on to slide 19, this is just a graphical representation of what we just showed. So on the left-hand side, the sliding scale overhead just shows you kind of a gradual decline in the fee rate charged as the dollar amount gets higher and higher and higher. On the right-hand side, you see a similar trend, but you can see it's a little bit more jagged. And this is where the stepped fee structure gets its name, because when you graph out the stepped fee structure, it looks like a set of staircases. Mind you, in this case, not a very safe-looking set of staircases, but still you get the general sense of the step down, step down, step down. So that is what the step, or that is how the step fee structure gets its name. So let's move into an example here, and I'll go through these few examples, and I'll take a break for a little bit to see if there's any questions I can answer out loud. So let's take an example. So in this particular example, we're going to look at a non-recurring RWA that's above the $2,000, so something that's not in that flat $500 fee range. It's going to have a fee charged against it. So the first grouping at the very top here is just the general kind of guidelines of how the fee is calculated and how it's applied. So when we're creating the initial estimate, so this is before we've even accepted the RWA, before you've signed the RWA, a GSA project manager or cost estimator is calculating the estimated direct costs into the summary cost estimate or the overtime utility estimate. So these are all the costs like design, construction, space planning, furniture procurement, anything else, IT, or things of that nature that might apply to whatever the work is that you need done. They plug in those direct costs into our fee calculator or the summary cost estimate. And now the total estimate amount is a combination of those direct costs plus the fees that are calculated on top of them. And those two components, direct costs plus fees, is what equals your RWA authorized amount. Now to back into the fee percentage, we take the number of fees, or the dollar amount of fees, I should say, divided by those direct costs, and that equates to the fee rate, the fee percentage. So that's the fee rate. So After we accept the RWA, and then we begin billing you, so focusing your attention on that second grouping of bullets there, the fee rate we calculated above is applied on top of your expenses each month. So as the project is delivered and expenses are recorded, we charge you or we bill you for those direct expenses plus the fees. And so let's, instead of looking at this, let's just go into example. I think it's going to make more sense. So we'll go into example. Let's go to slide 21. And let's take that example. So let's say our cost estimator, whatever you needed done, construction, renovations, design work, et cetera, let's say that all added up to $400,000. Now, if you remember from a few slides ago, I know you didn't memorize it, but you can check me on this, but a few slides ago, if you looked up $400,000 in that grid, that fell in the 9% rate tier range. So $400,000 times 9% equals $36,000. So that's the fee amount. So the total estimate, and therefore the total authorized amount, is $436,000, right? It's $400,000 for the direct costs plus $36,000 for the fees. That's the total authorized amount. And you can do the math in the reverse order. $36,000 in fees divided by $400,000 in direct costs equates to 9%. So now let's go through a few examples of charging or of the billing cycle. So let's say if you look in this middle grouping, specifically at the first bullet, let's say in month 1 there was no dollars in activity. We had nothing, we delivered nothing, there was no activity at all, therefore we had $0 to bill. We didn't bill anything, not direct costs, and because there's no direct cost, there's no fee to bill on top of it. It was 9% times 0 is 0. Nothing to bill in month 1. In month 2, let's say we had $23,000 in activity that month. So looking at this second bullet in this second grouping, how do we calculate the bill in month 2? So month 2 bill, it includes the full $23,000, so we need to be reimbursed for the $23,000 we spent, and we need to charge you the fee for that amount of work so far. So 9% times $23,000 is $2,070. So your total bill in month 2 is that $23,000 plus the $2,070 in fees equals a grand total of $25,070. So that's the total bill. Direct costs plus fees charged that month. Now let's take an RWA amendment. How does that work? What happens if you have to amend the RWA? So let's say in month 3 you amend the RWA up to $505,000. So before the RWA was $436,000, now it's $505,000. So $505,000 happens to fall into a lower fee tier. Now it's down to 8%, not 9%, but 8%. So what happens? So let's say in month 3, we're going to retroactively apply that 8%. Let's say in month 3 you had no new activity. So the only activity still to date in month 1, 2, and 3 of this RWA was that $23,000 that we billed you in month 2. However, in month 3, when our billing cycle runs, it's going to say, hey, wait a minute. We've charged $23,000 to date. $23,000 times 8% is only $1,840 in fees. Well, wait a minute. We already charged $2,070 in fees last month, and that's because the fee rate was 9%, not 8%, so the fee rate was higher. So in month 3, even though there's been no new activity, the billing cycle looks up or picks up this RWA, recalculates the fee, but now based on 8%, not 9%, and says, wait a minute, I charged $2,070 last month, but the true fee that should apply thus far on $23,000 of expenses is only $1,840. Therefore, in month 3, that difference is actually credited back to you. We'll issue you a credit of $230 because we're recalculating the fee now that we have an amendment in place. And we've overcharged you so far to date because the fee is 8%, so we'll issue you that credit. So the big thing I want to drive home with amendments here is that the amendment, so in this case the amendment went from $436,000 to $505,000. We are not charging you a fee on that roughly $70,000 difference. We're always and only looking at the total authorized amount and charging you the fee that equates to that. So now that the RWA is $505,000, 8% applies to all future costs, but also applies retroactively to any costs we've already billed for. And that's why in this example, you got a credit for $230 because we charged you less in fees for this new authorized amount. Let's take one more example on slide 22 now before we take a break here. And let's, in this case, take an example of a RWA below $2,000. So in this case, it's a flat $500 fee for that RWA. And you can see that here. So we estimated the direct cost to be $1,200. Therefore, the total estimate is $1,200 for direct costs plus the flat $500 equals a $1,700 authorized amount. In this case, there is no fee percentage. We're just going to charge the flat $500, so we're not calculating a fee rate of any kind. And that takes us down here to RWA acceptance, the second grouping, the middle grouping. So when you have an RWA below $2,000 and the flat $500 applies, we are going to apply that $500 in the very first month, no matter what. And this is similar to R-types. R-types have acted like this for years and years and years. R-types in the past charged the flat $100 fee in the very first month, no matter what happens. Similarly today, or in the new fee cycle, or fee structure, R-types will charge the flat $500 in the very first month. And now, for the new non-recurrent RWAs below $2,000, they will also charge the flat $500 in the very first month. So taking this new example, let's say in month 1, we had $50 in activity in month 1, and in month 2, we had $1,150 in expenses or activity. So in month 1, the bill is $550. That's because we're charging the $50 in expenses and the flat $500 fee in that very first month. Then in month 2, we're going to bill you for those $1,150 in expenses, but there's $0 in additional fees because we've already charged 100% of the fees already in month 1. Now let's take a look at an interesting example for an RWA amendment for this below $2,000 RWA. Now in this case, let's say in month 3, the RWA was amended from $1,700 to $2,500. So now that it's in $2,500, the new fee structure is not the flat $500, it's now 25%. So similar to the example we had on the previous slide, we're going to retroactively calculate the new fee structure. So in month 3, again, let's assume there's been $0 of new activity on this RWA. And we say, okay, well, you have charged $1,200 so far in months 1 and 2. Remember, $50 plus $1,150 is $1,200. So we've charged $1,200, or we've had $1,200 of direct expenses so far to date. The billing cycle in month 3 says, okay, $1,200 times 25% equals $300. Pegasus, the billing system, then compares, okay, well, previously we charged you $500, but really, as of today, as of the new fee structure, the new fee rate, you should have only been charged $300. So in month 3, we'll issue you a credit of that difference. In this case, a credit of $200 would be charged in month number 3. Okay, so those are examples. I wanted to go through those in depth. And this is, even though we use new RWAs, the new fee structure as examples, the fee structure under the current fee methodology, the 4% fee and the sliding scale fee, work exactly the same. They retroactively recalculate the fee each month if the fee changes. So this is nothing new. The only thing new with the new fee structure is the fee percentages that apply to different tiers. So with that, I'm going to pause here on slide 23 to take a sip of water, of course, but also see if there are any questions out there that you've been asking that I can answer out loud, which might be an answer that more of you are interested in than just the person who initially asked. So Eric?
Yeah, Steve, thanks for all of this so far. And we actually do have a question we want to read out for you here. Just getting it queued up for you. All right, and so we want you to ask you then, when closing an RWA, if not all funds were spent, are the fees recalculated?
Good question, and the answer to that is no. So the only time this answer first is abroad for everything, not just a closed RWA. The fee percentage is always tied to the authorized amount. So as the authorized amount increases, the fee percentage decreases. As the authorized amount decreases, the fee percentage increases, right? We saw that inverse relationship on those charts. Now at closure, let's say you had a $100,000 authorized amount RWA, right? But let's say we only end up spending $70,000 of that. We will not change the authorized amount from $100,000 down to $70,000 to match it at closing. And because we don't change the authorized amount, we just leave it at $100,000 at closing, the fee percentage will still be based on a $100,000 RWA. So the fee rate will not change at closing, even if we did not spend the full $100,000 in my example.
Great. And we do have one other question. I don't know if you touched on this a little bit. Can you just explain out sort of why the fee is higher for smaller dollar value RWAs?
Yes, and I kind of explained this, and I'll repeat it here just to reemphasize it. So when we did our analysis, the fee reform team did our analysis, we were losing lots of money on these small RWAs. And while we're not meant to recover the cost on an RWA by RWA basis, the objective of the OIG audit back in '95 and OMB is that you recover your costs on the program as a whole, right? But our small RWAs were losing lots of money. We were spending way more delivering them than we were recovering in costs. And our larger RWAs, those $1 million, multi-million-dollar RWAs, while they were making more or recovering more fees than they were costing, they weren't sufficient to totally have us break even. And so we wanted to charge a higher fee on the lower RWAs to at least have those RWAs come closer to breaking even. Even at these higher fee percentages, those super tiny RWAs, a $200 RWA, the fee we recover, even though it's flat $500, is still usually not going to be sufficient to fully recover the cost on that RWA all by itself because of all the people involved, project managers, estimators, acquisition, et cetera, that I mentioned earlier. It's still not going to recover the cost in some of those super duper RWAs. But as a whole, this new fee structure does recover our costs globally across all RWAs. But still, even still, those small RWAs are still money losers. But as I'm going to show you here as we get close to the very end of today's presentation, I'll show you some ways, some tools we have available to you to maybe avoid giving us a $200 RWA, so you don't have to pay a flat $500 fee on that. So stay tuned for that. There'll be some good answers to that small RWA dilemma coming up later in this presentation.
All right, that's a nice tease for what's upcoming. That exists. The questions we had in the queue, the subject matter experts are doing a great job in the chat, as you can well imagine. So I will turn it back to you. It looks like we're just now at the top of the hour, 12 o'clock Eastern, so we do have about a half hour more. So Steve, go right on ahead.
All right, so from here we should be able to snowball a little bit quicker. So I just want to talk about the implementation of the new fee structure, and it's all based on the start/acceptance date. Now you've heard us talk about acceptance dates, you've heard us talk about start dates. They are synonymous, just so you know. They are synonymous names. The start date used to be a name we've had for many decades before. We've been transitioning the title of a start date to really be the acceptance date. When did we accept the RWA? Because that's more representative of when the work could begin on an RWA. But throughout the rest of the presentation today, just realize that start date and acceptance date are meant to mean the same thing. They're the same field. You'll see throughout RETA and eRETA, it all says start/acceptance date. They are meant to be one and the same. So let's go into it here. Slide 24. So first and foremost, as is the process, we create an estimate first, and then we get to the RWA second. That's the typical workflow for this whole process. So when we create the estimate first, the estimated start date entered on that summary cost estimate, SCE, or overtime utility estimate, OUE, will drive which of the two fee structures is calculated in that estimate. Now up front, looking at those two bullets in the middle of this slide 24, the estimator, the GSA estimator, has to make the determination, is this estimate for a non-severable service or for a severable service? And let's start with the easier one first, which is severable service, that second bullet. The acceptance date for a severable service is simply equal to the first date of the period of performance. So several service RWAs might include overtime utilities, janitorial services, maintenance, landscaping, for example. So when is that period of performance going to begin? Usually we have a pretty good idea of what that's going to be when we're creating the estimate. So if that service is supposed to start July 31st, even though I'm creating my estimate today in June, I will put July 31st as the estimated start date on the estimate I'm creating. And therefore, because I put July 31st, that's before August 1st, my estimate will calculate the existing 4% fee and sliding scale fee structure. For non-severable RWAs, that top bullet there, estimating the acceptance date gets a little trickier because for non-severable RWAs, the start date or acceptance date is meant to be the date that the RWA is first accepted, which happens after all digital signatures are applied. And in this case, since GSA signs last, it's really the date that GSA applies our digital signature. Now, when I'm creating the estimate, I don't really have a great idea of when GSA might apply our digital signature on the RWA itself. So it's more of a loose estimate. And we'll talk about that here in a second. But for just to give you a sense of what non-severable RWA projects are, those are projects like renovations, construction, studies, design, things of those nature. So just be aware of the distinction that non-severable start date is estimated at GSA signature or when GSA signature will be applied, whereas a severable service, the estimated start date, is when the period of performance will begin. So that's a very important distinction because that drives which of the fee structures are calculated. So I want to give you this sense. So this is on slide 25 are the average days from each of these from point A to point B to point C, and so on and so forth. These are the average business days so far in fiscal year 2020 for each of these components for RWAs that have been accepted through eRETA. Since everything's funneled through eRETA today, these are the average days. So on average, it takes exactly 2 days from the time you submit a work request in eRETA to the time that GSA turns around, the GSA region turns around and assigns you a project manager. Now, the biggest chunk of time from there to acceptance is the second bullet. So 20.6 days on average for the portion that the customer has the project manager assigned to the point in time where you submit the RWA for GSA consideration for acceptance. Now, this 20.6 days includes a huge chunk of time, which is that sub-bullet there, of requirements development with the PM, cost estimates, schedule development, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So all that stuff that happens offline, you're meeting with a project manager and or his or her team on a regular basis. On average, that portion of requirements development takes 20.6 days. Once you've finished that and you've sent the RWA to GSA in eRETA, said we're ready for this, we're going to fund it, we've provided our funding information, et cetera. On average, it takes about 7.8 days for GSA to review your information, enter our own information into eRETA, and then route the RWA for digital signatures. And then lastly, it takes about less than a full business day, on average 0.8 business days for both the customer to digitally sign the RWA and for GSA to digitally sign the RWA. So all told, this whole process from the date you first submit a work request to GSA to the date we accept the RWA, on average has been 31.2 business days so far in FY 2020. Now this is the average, remind you, so smaller RWAs, less complex RWAs might take a lot less time, but bigger, more complex RWAs might take more than this 31 days. So just use this as a reference as the average number of days for this to happen. Now why I mention this is important is because this will impact those non-severable service RWAs. Remember, the non-severable service RWAs aren't accepted until this last part happens here, the 0.8 days. So if you're up here getting the estimate, and let's say today's July 15th, there's a good chance that July 15th plus 20 days plus 7.8 days plus 0.8 days is going to push you past August 1st, and therefore that non-severable RWA will be accepted after August 1st, and therefore the new fee structure will apply. So moving on to slide 26, where do I find this date on the estimate? So if you were to log into eRETA and you pull up this summary cost estimate on the screenshot here, the estimated RWA start / acceptance date is shown on the near the very top of the screen on the SCE. Same thing on the overtime utility estimate. I just don't have a screenshot of the overtime utility estimate here. But you can see here in this example, August 9th, 2020 is the date entered. In this case, if I had entered that date on my SCE as a GSA estimator, the fee that would calculate would be the new fee structure. So moving along to slide 27, this is just another example, same thing. If you did not go into eReader directly and pull up your estimate, if you got the PDF version of the estimate that we emailed to you or attached on the email to you, you could open up that PDF and similarly see the estimated start date here near the top of the PDF also shows as August 9th. So we know in that case that the new fee structure was calculated into this estimate. Again, August 1st or before, we'll use the 4% fee and sliding scale fee. August 1st or later, we'll use the new fee structure. Let me say that again. Before August 1st, so July 31st and before, we'll use the existing 4% fee and sliding scale fee structure. A date of August 1st or later, we'll use the new fee structure. So I'm bringing up this slide again, but this time with some highlights. So when you've gotten that estimate, which we just showed on the past two screenshots, you're somewhere in between this green bar and this, this yellow bar and this green bar. So GSA has now created the estimate, so we're nearing the end, or if we're not already at the end of this 20.6 days on average. We've given you the estimate, and now you've submitted now you can submit the RWA to GSA in eReader for us to consider for acceptance. So whenever you finally have the estimate in your hands, in your possession, you're somewhere in between this yellow bar and the green bar. So now you're kind of in the home stretch, right? We only have, on average, maybe 7.8 days left for GSA review and an additional 0.8 days left for digital signatures. So if you've gotten that estimate, let's say on July 15th, for example, and you know on average there's only about a little over 8 days left for everything else before acceptance. If on July 15th, GSA has given you an estimate that has an August 9th date like that example did, you might say, well, wait a minute, is that right? Should that date be before August 1st, and therefore should it calculate the old fee structure? Because on average, it's only going to take you another 8 days to get this accepted, and if today's July 15th, I think we could probably get this signed before July 31st or by July 31st. So those are just some things to keep in mind when you're thinking about that. When you get that summary cost estimate and you see that date and you know you're in this final home stretch here, does that date need to be reevaluated by the GSA estimator or project manager? And if he says no, because we have this, that, and the other thing, I realize that on average it's 7.8 days, but for this particular RWA, it's going to be 18.8 days for us to finalize our review or whatever the case might be. If they can give you a justification why that August 9th date might still hold true, then that is what it is. But just be aware, just think about that when you get an estimate from GSA that you're in this period of time here, you're in that home stretch, and you want to factor that in to see if the estimated start date is in fact sufficiently accurate or valid in your mind. Now, mind you, if this was a several service RWA, if the estimate was for several service, these dates don't come into play at all, because the date on a several service RWA, again, is the period of performance, not when GSA signs the RWA. So none of this information is really valid for a several service RWA, because we could, if the period of performance starts July 31st on a several service RWA, even if we don't sign that RWA until August 5th, it doesn't matter. July 31st is the true start date for that several service. Moving on to slide 29 here. Here's some just more screenshots to show you. So this is a screenshot of a PDF of a summary cost estimate that has has a July 31st date or earlier. And as you can see, it has line 14, regional management fee. It shows you the standard 4% fee applies. The label here is, of the second part is called costs associated with tenant personal property. And furthermore, you can see line 27 is called overhead fee and sliding scale fee. So this is just a whole bunch of kind of ahas, things that you might see on the SCE summary cost estimate that would suggest the old fee or current fee structure applies. Now compare that to slide 30. And this is what the PDF looks like for an estimate created under the new fee structure. So first and foremost, the label at the top is now called additional project cost, a little bit more of a generic name. You can see line 14 now is not called 4% fee. It's just called moving and move coordination. That's because we've removed a 4% fee calculation line. There is no 4% fee anymore. And line 23 is called the RWA management fee with the RWA management fee calculation. So those are just some of the things that can draw your attention will be drawn to help you quickly distinguish between an estimate with the old fee structure and an estimate with the new fee structure. And I should point out here at the bottom of the new SCE, we just repeat the range of accuracy. The range of accuracy is on all the SCEs, but just one of the nuances with the new SCE and the new fee structure is that we'll repeat the range of accuracy down here again. So that's another little thing to notice to help you recognize, is this an estimate with the old fee structure, or is this an estimate with the new fee structure? Moving on to slide 31. Now let's say we've gotten the RWA into RITA. GSA is entering our half of the RWA. If you were to open it up in eRITA and navigate to over here, you can see the PBS information tab is selected. Now mind you, you don't have the ability to edit this tab because this is a GSA only tab, but you can still see it. So you can still visually go to it, and that'll help you distinguish, hey, is this a several service RWA, yes or no? If this is selected yes, as this example is, that's the moment to say, okay, oh yes, several service yes means that the start acceptance date is based on the period of performance. It's not based on when GSA digitally assigns it. Alternatively, if this is set as no, then we know it's a non-severable service, and therefore the acceptance start date is based on digital signatures. So that's just, again, another way to look at that, confirm which one, is this severable or non-severable, and confirm which of the two acceptance dates will apply. Moving on to slide 32 as we wrap things up here, is again, moving down a few tabs to the PBS approval tab, you will see the acceptance / start date of the RWA itself. Again, if it said several was yes on the previous slide, then this date here will drive the new fee or the old fee. So in this case, August 31st will stay put because this is a several service RWA, therefore the period of performance begins on August 31st, and the new fee structure will apply. Now on the flip side, let's say on that previous slide, the several service flag said no, this was non-severable. And let's say you went into this RWA and GSA entered August 31st, and you're like, well, wait, why? Today is June 25th. Why would you enter August 31st? You don't have to worry about that because for a non-severable service RWA, once we route it for signature, let's say it got customer signature today, GSA also signed it today, June 25th, this August 31st date would be overridden with the GSA signature date, so this would now show as June 25th. And therefore the old fee structure, or the 4% fee and slide and scale fee, would apply instead. So even if GSA enters a wrong date here for a non-severable service RWA, don't worry about it. Once we get digital signatures, the digital signature date will override this date entered here with the true digital signature date. So let's close it out with a few more FAQs here. And some of you might be asking, okay, well, what if the estimated start date on the estimate is different from the actual start date on the RWA? And in that case, we do have a problem, but only temporarily, because what that'll mean is that the estimate calculated one fee structure, but the RWA is actually going to calculate a different fee structure, because whatever's on the RWA actually trumps what's on the estimate. Because when the RWA is accepted, it's sent down to our financial management system, aka our billing system, and that instructs our billing system which of the two fee structures to calculate as bills are generated down the road. So we will be monitoring this the whole time as we get close to August 1st, on August 1st, and after August 1st to see, hey, do we have estimates with one date and RWAs linked to them with different dates? If so, we will reconcile those two and make sure the dates are both on the same side of August 1st. In some cases, the dates should both be on July 31st or earlier. We'll reconcile that. In other instances, both dates of the estimate and RWA should be on the other side of August 1st, and we'll reconcile that too, in which case sometimes the authorized amount may need to change, and we may need to have you re-sign the RWA for the true amount, given that the fee amount is either higher or lower based on which of the two fee structures is accurate. But if this happens to you, don't worry, you don't have to monitor. We will monitor that for you, and we will follow up with you as appropriate if it happens. So here's what I was talking about during the last break. The next two slides will cover some examples of how, if you have, typically you have, let's say you gave GSA a $250 RWA for something very small. What options do you have? One of those options is an F-type RWA. F-types effectively allow you, if you're not aware, to execute multiple small miscellaneous services, sometimes we call them tasks, on a single RWA. There are some limitations to F-types though. The total authorized amount of an F-type cannot exceed $250,000 per RWA, and you can't have a single task on that said F-type for more than $25,000. Furthermore, F-types are limited to a single fiscal year. So if you have a big construction project that's going to span multiple years, an F-type would not work for that particular case. So let's take a look at an example to give you more insight. Let's say on a given F-type, you might have a $600 task to change key locks, a $22,000 task to replace damaged carpet squares throughout the whole first floor of a building, and then a $350 task to patch a hole in a wall, etc. So instead of giving us 3 separate RWAs for those 3 separate tasks, you could instead give us one F-type, and all 3 of those tasks and more could be all done under that one F-type. So how is that beneficial to you? Well, the third bullet explains that. The fee rate charged on F-types will be based on the total authorized amount of the F-type, not the dollar amount of each task. So let's say that this F-type we just did was $200,000, right? That equates to an 11% rate. So that $600 task we talked about a little while ago for the key lock changes, because that $600 task was done on this one F-type, we'd only charge you $66, that's 11% of $600, for that one task versus a flat $500 fee had you given us that $600 key lock RWA as its standalone N-type RWA. So that is the benefit of the F-types, is that these tasks can be done on one RWA. You're only giving us one RWA, not many small ones, and we charge you the fee rate 11% in this case versus a flat $500 fee had you done that $600 RWA all by itself. And just take note of the caveat here at the very bottom of the disclaimer. F-type RWAs may only be used for small miscellaneous services and must be completed in the same fiscal year the RWA was accepted. F-types cannot be used for project-based work. So F-types have existed for a long time. We have it all documented on our websites and our policy, et cetera. This is not something new we just rolled out with a new fee structure. This has been a long-standing thing. But F-types are one possible option for you to utilize instead of giving us a bunch of small, couple $100 standalone RWAs. Option number 2, moving to slide 35, is the micro-purchase delegation of authority. This was issued in January 2015, so also not something new with the new fee reform. This has been out there for 5 years now. And what this micro-purchase delegation of authority allows is that the cost of work, so let's just say you have a small, let's take that key lock thing, for example, from the last slide, for $600. If you have something like that, that's below the micro-purchase micro-purchase threshold, which is $2,000 for construction or $2,500 for services, you have the ability to utilize this micro-purchase delegation authority and effectively do the project yourself outside of an RWA. And therefore, if you're not giving us an RWA, there's no fees to pay on top of it. Now, there are some caveats here. You as the agency have to receive written concurrence from the GSA building or property manager, or if you're in a lease building, written concurrence from the GSA lease administrator manager, the LAM, and or the lease contracting officer. And you have to get this approval each and every time. If you got approval for the key lock thing, 3 months ago, you don't automatically have the authority to do carpet square replacement, today. You have to get the approval, the written concurrence each and every time. But this allows you to then procure your contractor yourself and effectively do these small projects on your own without paying GSA anything. Now, the authority to utilize this has initially only been delegated from the GSA administrator to the department heads in your various agencies. Now, in order for you to utilize this, the agency administrator or the appropriate title of the main person running your agency has to have redelegated that downstream to other folks in your agency in order for you to utilize it. If they have not, right now the only person that can utilize this delegation is the administrator, him or herself. They have to redelegate it down to you in order for you to utilize it. Again, to find out more about this, go to this website, gsa.gov/facilities management, all one word, and then click on the Facilities Operations tab, and then you'll see a whole section called Micro Purchase Delegation of Authority. So maybe something to read up on as we head towards August 1st. All right, I'm going to close things down here. We have 10 minutes left, so this is perfect timing. Just another plug for the FY 2020 year-end deadlines. Again, this also is not fee-related. This is a fee deadline we do, excuse me, I just said fee. This is a year-end deadline we do every single year. This is, again, not tied to the fee change. So slide 37 recaps the deadline for this year's RWAs. And we want to give you some good news, right? You've been hearing about new fees and more fees, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we have some good news. As a result of using eRETA that you've all been required to use starting this past October 1st, we have noticed the turnaround time and the efficiencies already showing themselves, and we are experiencing much quicker turnaround times and efficiencies because of your use of eRETA. So if you recall in the past, the year-end deadline to get us an RWA so that we could hopefully accept it by the end of September was usually August 31st or August 30th. You had to give us everything a whole month in advance in order for us to accept the RWA before the end of September. Well, because of the efficiencies we've gleaned out of the eRETA and the quicker turnaround times, we've been able to move back that deadline for fiscal year 2020. And so for Property Act RWAs, the deadline to get us a quote-unquote fully executable RWA has now been pushed back to Tuesday, September 8th, 2020. Now you might be wondering, why a Tuesday? Well, Tuesday, September 8th is the first business day back after the Labor Day weekend. So that's where we pushed it after Labor Day. So you have a whole additional 8 or 9 days compared to past years to get your RWAs into eRETA and for us to review them in order for us to potentially consider them for acceptance. Now again, this does not mean you initially enter a work request into eRETA on September 8th. This has to be fully vetted out. If you remember those slides from the average days, 2 days, 20.8 days, 7.8 days, that whole chart has to be where we've given you an estimate essentially in order to, we essentially have to have given you an estimate by September 8th in order for your RWA to qualify for potential acceptance. Economy Act and DOD RWAs, again, they have an earlier deadline, Friday, July 17th. This is a typical deadline. It's a little bit of a softer deadline, not a hard deadline like September 8th, where we have some more flexibility if you have Economy Act or DOD RWAs. And then, of course, as usual, emergency RWAs or amendments can happen after both of these deadlines on a case-by-case basis. So with that said, I am done with my part of the presentation. I'm going to turn it back over to Eric. I believe we have a few more poll questions to ask you, and then we will wrap everything up and close it down. So Eric?
We do, Steve. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Before we get into the poll questions, a quick announcement. We did notice a discrepancy in the slides we sent to all registrants last night versus what was shared today. And this relates to some dates on slides 25 and 28. That's the timetable to acceptance that Steve was just talking about. In the file pod that you can see above your chat window, you can download the correct version of today's slide deck. I just want to make everyone aware of that. So what you got yesterday and maybe even what you downloaded this at the beginning of the presentation, take another moment and download that from the file pod. Now, we will also send that around to all participants after the fact, just so that we have everybody on the same page with those dates. So we just wanted to clarify that. We do have just a couple more minutes left in our time together, and we do want to ask 2 quick knowledge check poll questions of our participants. So we are now going to bring in the first of our 2 poll questions. This is, depending on the value of your project, the $1,000 or $1 million question. And that is, when does the new RWA fee and structure go live? A couple of choices here. It could be August 1st of this year. That's just 5 weeks. We also have, no one's fallen for it, so I don't even know why I'm going to bother with the other options, you guys. Of course, it's August 1st, 2020. That is 5 weeks from today is that implementation date. So that is not the date of the year-end acceptance. It is not the new fiscal year. It is 5 weeks from today. So almost a 100% success rate. Great. So We will get poll question number 2 coming in just one moment. And here we go. This one might even be a little trickier, though. We want to know what types of RWAs does the new structure apply to? Is it only what those quote-unquote project RWAs? Is it only service RWAs? Is it all RWAs? And once again, it's overwhelming. Seems that people have been paying attention. 96%. It is all RWAs. So excellent. So it looks like we were paying attention to just at least the very basics and hopefully a whole lot more today. So we are going to swing that poll question out. And we are going to leave this resource page up here. Quick plug for that website, www.gsa.gov/RWA that you see right there. If you have a question, if you have forgotten something, the chances are you can find the information right there on that website. With that, coming to the conclusion of today's presentation, so I want to take a moment to thank a few people. First and foremost, I want to thank all of our customer attendees for spending 90 minutes with us today. We hope that you enjoyed the conversation. I certainly want to thank Steve for a great presentation and the subject matter experts who are handling things in the chat, and also the Client Enrichment Series team members keeping things moving behind the scenes. So thank all of you for this good presentation today. As I mentioned, we are going to pull out all the questions and answers, and even questions we didn't get to if we didn't have the time, and we are going to turn them around into a formal FAQ document, questions and answers. We are going to make them available to you, and we will post them both on our Client Enrichment Series website, as well as the RWA website, that URL that I was talking about earlier, and those will be available shortly after today's presentation once we go through everything. As I mentioned earlier, we do have one more session on this very same topic coming up. If you would like a refresher, or if you know a colleague who should really learn more about what you heard today, you can join us again on Thursday, July 16th at 2 p.m. Eastern. And we will be going over the same information again, but you can bring different questions for our subject matter experts. We did talk a little bit about eReader. I know many folks here are eReader users, but if you were among that subset that was not, and you realized light bulb over your head you should be, you can come to our next eReader Digest training session that combines elements of our beginner and our advanced session. So if you don't have access, or you're just trying to get used to what the functionality is, you'll want to join us on Tuesday, July 14th at 1 p.m. Eastern. And then we recur those the second Tuesday of every month thereafter. So you can learn more or register for any of our sessions online at www.gsa.gov/CES. As always, the goal of the Client Enrichment Series is to engage our audience in workplace topics that contribute to your mission success and the effective management of your real estate and workplace portfolios. Once again, on behalf of the entire Client Enrichment Series and Reimbursable Services team today, my name is Eric Bolton signing off. Thank you very much for a wonderful session, and have a great rest of your day.